In 1934, America's most futuristic train rolled out of Pullman's shops in Chicago, a gleaming aluminum tube that looked like nothing else on rails. 8 years later, it was cut up for scrap. The reason isn't what anyone expected. 1 million people lined up to see it. It broke speed and fuel economy records, and the men who worked inside it kept getting sick. On February 12th of that year, railroad officials gathered to inspect the completed model, designated the M-10000. Under the direction of chief designer Martin Blomberg, builders had shaped high-strength duralumin into a low-slung, articulated form that mirrored the lines of modern aircraft. Backed by Union Pacific chairman Averell Harriman, the project aimed to replace the heavy, soot-belching steam locomotives of the past with a lighter, faster alternative. Every seam was flush riveted, and the windows were completely sealed, presenting a smooth exterior painted in striking yellow and brown. It was designed to save a struggling industry through sheer speed and lower operating costs. Yet this very design created an enclosed environment that would cut the train's career short, ending its run long before its creators ever anticipated. During its promotional tour, Union Pacific reported that over 1 million people lined up across 68 cities to see the 3-car Streamliner. Company advertisements claimed the train broke fuel economy records, offering a rapid, cost-effective alternative to steam travel. The tour was an undeniable public relations victory. Yet decades after the M-10000 was retired, a different narrative surfaced. Later histories and modern accounts assert that the crews operating the train frequently became ill during runs. While these claims of crew illness align with the known effects of the engine's exhaust, they do not appear in contemporary railroad records, employee magazines, or government safety reports from the 1930s. This creates a challenging historical puzzle. The physical layout of the power car makes these health issues technically possible, but the lack of official documentation from its operational life means the claim remains an unverified, yet highly plausible, historical inference rather than an established fact. Unlike traditional trains that coupled heavy steel coaches to a massive steam engine, the M-10000 was engineered as a single, integrated system. This 3-car articulated unit operated as an unbroken train set, stretching just over 200 feet from its front grille to its rounded rear. Under the direction of Pullman standard designer Martin P. Blomberg, builders constructed the body from duralumin, a lightweight aluminum alloy primarily used in aircraft manufacturing. Every panel was flush riveted to reduce wind resistance, forming a smooth metallic envelope that culminated in a prominent rounded caterpillar nose. By utilizing this lightweight alloy and sharing wheel trucks, known as Jacob's bogies, between the car joints, Blomberg kept the total weight of the train set to just 85 tons, less than a single empty steam locomotive of the era. This dramatic weight reduction was key to the railroad's economic strategy. The streamlined profile was designed to slide through the air at speeds of up to 112 miles per hour, all while consuming far less fuel than coal-burning steam engines. The entire configuration, comprising a power baggage car, a 56-seat coach, and a trailing buffet coach, represented a radical departure from established railway practices. It promised Union Pacific a fast, highly efficient, and significantly cheaper method of transporting passengers during the leanest years of the Great Depression, offering a modern alternative to the growing network of highways and bus lines. In 1934, American railroads faced a crisis of survival. The Great Depression had decimated passenger revenues as families abandoned trains for personal automobiles and the growing network of regional buses. Passenger rail traffic across the country had plummeted by half over the previous decade. To compete, Union Pacific had to abandon its reliance on steam. While steam locomotives had powered the nation's expansion, they were increasingly difficult to defend. They were massive, dirty, labor-intensive, and highly expensive to operate and maintain. Every run of a coal-fired locomotive required an army of firemen, track workers, and maintenance crews to clean boilers and repair heavy track damage. Union Pacific needed a design that could simultaneously lower operating costs and recapture the public's imagination. Internal combustion offered a solution. By utilizing a lighter power plant, the railroad could drastically reduce fuel consumption and decrease track maintenance costs. Averell Harriman, the ambitious chairman of Union Pacific, became the executive sponsor of this airplane-like concept. Harriman saw that saving passenger rail required more than incremental updates. It demanded a complete structural redesign. He pushed the railroad to invest in an unproven, lightweight system. The project represented a high-stakes business survival experiment with national consequences, far removed from mere corporate vanity. If the lightweight Streamliner succeeded, it would redefine passenger transit for a new era. If it failed, it risked accelerating the permanent decline of private passenger rail. The pressure to deliver a functional, highly efficient alternative to steam forced Union Pacific to accept the risks of an entirely untested mechanical design. Immediately after factory delivery in February 1934, Union Pacific bypassed regular passenger runs to send the M-10000 on a massive promotional tour. This was a rolling exhibition of industrial design rather than a functional transit run. Over the next several months, the Streamliner covered 12,625 miles, traveling across the lines of 14 separate railroads to reach 68 cities. Every stop along the way became a major civic event. Crowds numbering in the tens of thousands swarmed rural depots and urban terminals, eager to touch the smooth, duralumin shell. In York, Pennsylvania and Riverside, California, police officers had to clear pathways through thousands of onlookers who blocked the tracks, just to see the train glide past. Inside, visitors experienced a quiet, dust-free cabin, featuring filtered air and sealed windows. Luxuries entirely missing from standard steam passenger coaches of the 1930s. The peak of this national demonstration took place in Chicago, where the train was showcased near the Century of Progress International Exposition. Union Pacific records documented 565,922 individual visitors who queued to inspect the train set during its stay in the city. By the time the tour concluded, over 1.2 million Americans had walked through the cars. To a population exhausted by economic depression, the bright yellow train represented a tangible sign of recovery. It was a public relations triumph that established the Streamliner as a national icon of progress before it had carried a single paying passenger. This coast-to-coast parade proved that the public was desperate for a new way to travel. With its reputation secured and its promotional duties complete, Union Pacific prepared to transition the experimental train from a lightweight display piece into a working locomotive, ready to face the daily punishment of regular passenger service. While later Streamliners became synonymous with diesel power, the M-10000 relied on a fundamentally different propulsion experiment. Inside the power car sat a Winton 191 AV12 engine producing 600 horsepower. This engine utilized spark ignition rather than compression ignition. Dick Dilworth and the engineering team at Winton designed the power plant to run on low-grade distillate fuel, a cheap refinery byproduct. The engine turned a generator, which fed electric current directly to the traction motors on the wheels. This power chain made the arrangement gasoline-electric in principle rather than diesel-electric. Winton's engineers chose distillate to slash operating costs, wagering that a spark ignition system could successfully burn this heavy fuel oil. The operating principle was closer to a giant gasoline motor than to the diesels that followed, requiring 4 spark plugs per cylinder and specialized carburetors to vaporize the liquid. Dilworth's propulsion experiment achieved the immediate goal of cheap, lightweight horsepower, proving that internal combustion could pull a passenger train at sustained high speeds. but operating a massive spark ignition engine on low-grade fuel inside a tightly enclosed, streamlined envelope introduced an entirely new physical variable. The ultimate safety of this design depended on what happened inside those cylinders, raising a critical question about the nature of the combustion products left behind. The contrast between spark ignition and diesel engines lies in how they burn fuel, a distinction that directly dictates the chemistry of their exhaust. When a spark ignition engine operates on low-grade distillate, the combustion process is often incomplete. This incomplete oxidation of carbon yields carbon monoxide, a gas that is entirely colorless and odorless. During the early 1930s, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics compiled data on this combustion phenomenon. Published as Report 476, the study established a contemporary technical baseline for spark ignition engines. The researchers found that these power plants typically discharged raw exhaust, containing between 7 and 12% carbon monoxide by volume. In comparison, diesel engines operating under load produced exhaust with carbon monoxide levels hovering near just 1%. This disparity stems from the combustion method itself, as the distillate spark ignition system shares the inefficient fuel-burning profile of gasoline engines. These percentages represent source concentrations, the raw gases at the manifold, rather than direct measurements of the air a worker would breathe in the crew compartment. In conventional operations, open-air dilution quickly disperses these gases, rendering them harmless. Yet, an enclosed, streamlined train set presents a completely different environment, where safety depends entirely on keeping these source gases separated from the cabin. While this chemical reality does not prove that the crew of the M-10000 was exposed, it establishes a clear, scientifically plausible hazard that the train's designers had to contain. To insulate passengers from the noise and soot of traditional rail travel, Pullman Standard designed the M-10000 as a fully sealed envelope. The train featured fixed, unopenable windows and an early air conditioning system that recirculated interior air. Because the three-car train set was articulated, sharing wheel trucks between the cars, its interior formed a continuous, unbroken volume of air, stretching from the nose to the rear. The power car's machinery compartment sat immediately adjacent to the crew cab, separated only by a partition and a hinged door. This continuous interior layout raised the possibility that engine exhaust could migrate from the engine room directly into crew spaces. While the passenger climate control system was designed to pressurize the coaches and filter dust, ventilating the engine room was an entirely separate mechanical challenge. Original Pullman drawings reveal a complex ventilation scheme. These plans show intake ducts designed to bring fresh air past the operator's station and into the engine compartment, where the air would pass over the hot Winton manifolds before exiting through two vertical exhaust stacks on the roof. How effectively this layout functioned remains a point of historical debate. One reading suggests this arrangement created a reliable upward draft, isolating the crew from toxic fumes. However, archival records do not contain verified contemporary reports of active forced exhaust fans or mechanical extraction systems designed to clear the machinery room. No documented measurements of carbon monoxide levels inside the cab exist from the train's active service. Without physical test data or air monitoring logs, the question of whether the M-10000 successfully vented its exhaust or trapped it inside remains unresolved. Inside the cab of the M-10000, the unnamed engineers and firemen who operated the train worked in an environment defined by intense physical strain. The compact power car was a severe workspace. With the Winton V12 engine mounted immediately behind the control stand, the crew sat within a metallic chamber that magnified every mechanical force. The duralumin and steel framing vibrated continuously, sending constant tremors through the floor and seats. while the heat radiating off the engine block rose into the tight cabin, raising temperatures to uncomfortable levels. The noise of a 12-cylinder engine running at high throttle was deafening, filling the small compartment with a continuous roar that made spoken communication nearly impossible. Along with the heat and noise came the heavy smell of hot lubricating oil and vaporized distillate fuel, a thick, kerosene-like odor that clung to the clothing and skin of the operators. Decades after the Streamliner was retired, historical accounts surfaced claiming that these crews frequently suffered from persistent headaches, recurring nausea, and bouts of grogginess or fatigue during their shifts. Because these specific reports of illness appear only in modern retellings and secondary accounts, they must be treated with strict historical caution. No first-hand diary, letter, or period interview from an identified crew member has been located to verify these claims. Without a documented primary source from a named engineer or fireman who ran the train, these physical symptoms must be classified as secondary historical inferences, rather than established facts. Still, modern occupational medicine and industrial hygiene standards show that the reported symptoms are medically compatible with carbon monoxide exposure. Combustion engineers and toxicologists explain that carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin in the bloodstream with an affinity over 200 times greater than oxygen. This binding process forms carboxyhemoglobin, which actively disrupts the transport of oxygen to vital organs and brain tissue. According to references from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Environmental Protection Agency, even a low-dose exposure to this gas in an enclosed space will gradually produce dull headaches, dizziness, physical weakness, and mental confusion over the course of a multi-hour run. In a sealed cabin, these indicators would compound slowly, often leaving workers unaware of their deteriorating condition until they stepped into fresh air. While this medical explanation shows how the gas acts on the body, it cannot diagnose unnamed workers from the past. Operating any locomotive in the 1930s was grueling work. The headaches and grogginess described in later accounts could easily have been caused by extreme engine heat, constant physical vibration, poor sleep, or ordinary operating fatigue. To date, researchers have not located a single contemporary medical report, Union Pacific roster, trade press article, or internal labor union record that documents a crew member being treated for gas poisoning on this train. This complete absence of primary documentation leaves the claims unresolved. We are left with a plausible technical hazard, but a silent historical archive. What then can the surviving institutional record actually establish about the daily operation and ultimate fate of this pioneering Streamliner? The M-10000 remained in daily passenger service for nearly 7 years, logging almost 1 million miles before its retirement in late 1941. To understand why Union Pacific kept the train running despite the risk of exhaust leaks, historians look to the immense institutional pressure on the railroad. The Streamliner was a symbol of modern progress and a key weapon in the fight against highways and buses. Withdrawing it early or admitting to a major design flaw would have dealt a devastating blow to Union Pacific's public reputation and its financial recovery during the Great Depression. But the narrative of a cover-up is not supported by the surviving historical record. A systematic search of contemporary industry journals, such as Railway Age and Railway Mechanical Engineer, reveals no articles or letters detailing carbon monoxide exposure on the train. Union Pacific employee publications from the era remain completely silent on the issue of toxic fumes or chronic crew illnesses. Archivists and researchers examining Union Pacific's corporate papers have also failed to locate a single verified safety memorandum, a work order for cab ventilation modifications, or an official retirement report that attributes the train's withdrawal to crew health. This absence of primary evidence presents a major archival challenge. Historians like David P. Morgan, William D. Middleton, and John F. White Jr. offer valuable technical and cultural context regarding early Streamliners. But their works rely on secondary accounts rather than direct, contemporaneous proof of crew poisoning. Still, the limits of the archive mean that a lack of documentation is not definitive proof of a safe working environment. Incomplete records and restricted access to historic corporate files make it difficult to prove a negative. It is entirely possible that Union Pacific managers handled crew complaints informally, choosing to tolerate or quietly manage the operational risks to preserve their flagship's reputation, rather than leaving a paper trail of official reports. Without the discovery of new primary documentation, such as personal crew diaries, union grievance files, or internal medical logs, the claim of widespread crew poisoning cannot be stated as a proven historical fact. The legacy of the M-10000 remains a clear, scientifically plausible hazard that is, for now, incompletely documented. On January 31, 1935, Union Pacific ended the train's exhibition career and placed it into regular passenger service under a new name, the City of Salina. The national showpiece was assigned to a modest regional route running daily between Kansas City, Missouri, and Salina, Kansas. This short run covered 187 miles, with a scheduled running time of 3 hours and 30 minutes. The futuristic Streamliner had essentially become a local passenger train. Its daily service record was defined by routine mechanical demands. In August 1935, a low-speed axle failure forced the railroad to pull the train from service. It remained sidelined for a 51-day outage, while maintenance crews worked on a solution. Union Pacific eventually installed larger, stronger axles to handle the physical stress of the route, finally allowing the train to return to service in October. Despite these mechanical setbacks, the City of Salina proved remarkably durable. The train continued to run back and forth across the Kansas plains throughout the late 1930s and into the early 1940s. By the time Union Pacific permanently withdrew the train from operation on December 16, 1941, the lightweight three-car set had accumulated approximately 899,000 miles of active service. This extensive mileage demonstrated the continued usefulness of the lightweight design, even as the realities of daily operation exposed the gap between its initial publicity and practical reality. The M-10000 spent its working life not as a revolutionary speed machine, but as a dependable, short-haul regional carrier, fulfilling its schedules day after day. Union Pacific's pursuit of the Streamliner concept did not stop with the City of Salina. Even as the first train ran its regional Kansas route, the railroad was already introducing its successor, the M-10001. Delivered in late 1934, this new train set abandoned the spark ignition distillate engine entirely, opting instead for a Winton 201A diesel engine. This was a true diesel-electric configuration, relying on compression ignition rather than spark plugs to burn its fuel. In a compression ignition engine, air is squeezed inside the cylinders under intense pressure until it reaches temperatures hot enough to ignite the injected diesel fuel instantly. This process results in far more complete combustion. While the distillate engine of the M-10000 produced exhaust high in carbon monoxide, the diesel power plant in the M-10001 emitted exhaust with carbon monoxide levels, averaging around just 1% under normal operating loads. This transition to compression ignition provided a much cleaner burning, more efficient, and mechanically reliable propulsion system. The Winton 201A became the technological template for the thousands of diesel-electric locomotives that would eventually replace steam power across North America in the decades that followed. Importantly, no surviving corporate memo, railroad record, or union grievance suggests this fundamental shift in propulsion was made to address crew illnesses on the earlier train. Instead, the move to diesel represents the natural maturation of an experimental technology. Union Pacific was simply adopting a superior, industry-wide engineering standard that offered greater reliability, higher horsepower, and lower operating costs. By choosing diesel-electric propulsion for the M-10001 and all subsequent streamliners, the railroad established the pattern for modern American railroading, quietly bypassing the chemical hazards of the distillate experiment. On December 16, 1941, Union Pacific quietly pulled the Pioneer Streamliner from service. Less than 2 months later, on February 13, 1942, the railroad sold the train set for scrap. By April, workers in Omaha had completely dismantled the aluminum structure, reclaiming approximately 100,000 pounds of duralumin. This metal was immediately melted down and diverted to factories building aircraft for the war effort. No official corporate record, disposal order, or government bulletin linked this sudden destruction to crew health or toxic fumes. The decision was framed entirely as a response to high operating costs and the urgent demands of the wartime economy. Because the entire train was melted down, no physical specimen survives today. Engineers and historians cannot run diagnostic tests, measure modern emissions, or inspect the seals on the power car's bulkheads. The physical evidence is gone, leaving researchers to reconstruct the train's mechanical reality from original blueprints, black and white photographs, and a handful of carefully preserved documents. The M-10000 remains a ghost, leaving its ultimate mystery locked within a vanished machine. Evaluating the legacy of the M-10000 requires drawing a clear line between different categories of historical evidence. This boundary separates documented fact, later account, and technical inference. First, the documented facts establish the train as a major technological success. The Streamliner proved that lightweight, aerodynamic designs were commercially viable and that internal combustion power could reliably handle high-speed passenger schedules over hundreds of thousands of miles. The physical records from Pullman and Union Pacific verify its construction, its massive promotional tour, its 7 years of daily service, and its final dismantling for wartime salvage. These records confirm that the train succeeded as a business venture and a public relations victory. Second, the claims of widespread crew poisoning belong to the category of later accounts. These reports of headaches, nausea, and chronic illness appear almost exclusively in modern retellings and secondary histories written decades after the train was scrapped. Despite systematic searches through corporate files, union grievance logs, and contemporary trade journals, no primary 1930s records survive to confirm that crew members suffered from chronic carbon monoxide poisoning, or that the railroad actively managed an exposure crisis. No employee compensation claims or specific medical reports have ever been recovered to corroborate these stories. Third, the hazard itself remains a highly credible technical inference. The physical evidence of the engine design and the sealed cabin layout supports this possibility. Engineering data from the period shows that a spark ignition engine running on distillate fuel produced high levels of carbon monoxide, and the enclosed, continuous interior of the articulated train set created a pathway for these gases to accumulate in the operator's cab. This makes the threat of carbon monoxide exposure scientifically sound, even if the human consequences remain undocumented. Viewed through these three levels of evidence, the M-10000 is best understood as a flawed pioneer, rather than a simple mechanical failure. The Streamliner achieved its primary goal of revitalizing American passenger rail during a severe economic crisis, yet its design exposed an early, unrecognized law of modern transportation engineering. When designers seal a vehicle to isolate passengers from the outside environment, they assume an absolute responsibility for managing the air they trap inside. Today, the M-10000 exists only in blueprints and archival photos, its metal long ago melted into history. Yet its legacy remains a silent warning for modern design. As we build increasingly sealed, autonomous, and high-tech spaces, the risk of what we trap inside grows with our ambition. We must always ask, what are we sacrificing in the name of progress? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more untold histories of innovation.